right, welcome to Up Close and Personal, our series profiling Taylor's government leadership. I'm your host, Carl Zimak. Today's special guest is City Council Chairman Doug Geis, seated closest to me. He has served as the chair since being the top vote getter in the City Council election in November of 2021. This is Doug's third non-consecutive term on the City Council, having previously served as both the chairman and the pro tem. Between terms on City Council, Doug served in the Michigan State House from 2009 to 2014. He graduated first in his class from Truman High School in 1988 and went on to earn a bachelor's degree in engineering and a master's degree in business administration from the University of Michigan. After receiving his engineering degree, he went to work for Ford Motor Company, quickly moving up the ranks and into management by age 29. He continues to work for Ford to this day. When it comes to Taylor politics and the Geis family, Doug is just a portion of the story, which is why we have his father, Dave, hi Dave, and his brother, David, on the show today. David is the Assistant General Counsel for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, was also a former Taylor councilman in the city of Taylor. Dave served as Chief of Staff to the legendary William Ford from 1982 to 95. And in addition, as you all probably know out there, Doug's wife, Erica, is Taylor's current state senator. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. That was a mouthful there. You guys are a load to handle.
Yeah,
here.
we could have pared that back a little bit.
That's probably probably true. Doug, the show's obviously focused on you, but we're going to be moving around here a little bit. But we're going to begin with you. After 2 terms in the council and 3 in the state legislature, why'd you return last year?
To be honest, I was fine leaving, the local politics to the folks that were on the city council. I think the folks that have been involved in the local government since the time that I was here did their job well. And we know that there was some turmoil going into last year's election, uncertainty, and I thought, maybe some expertise. Now I'm the old person in the room, where I was a young whippersnapper when I started. But also my best friend, who retired from the Marines, 22 years, is on the President's Helicopter Squadron. I told him he should run. And he said, well, if I run, you need to run. And I'd say the only downside to the election last year is that he didn't win. He made it through the primary, and he was looking to serve. Okay. And on the flip side, I never thought I'd come in first in the election. So, but always grateful to the voters, because you never know. You put your name out there, people. They can go this way or that way. So why did I run? It's an honor. It's an honor to serve. You put your name out there, and the people get to choose whether or not they want you or not.
Were you gentlemen surprised that he ran for council again?
I was.
Okay, David.
Yeah, I basically said, why do you want to jump back into that, right? It comes from our parents. Our father's here, but public service is important to us. And I think that in this day and age, people tend to. It's easy to complain, but they don't necessarily want to get involved. And Doug's always been one of those people that wants to get involved and dig in deep. And ultimately, we all care about our city, and so we want to see what's best for it. So, once he did, you jump in, wholeheartedly for him. But and being the chair, it's a tough position.
Right.
It's a lot harder than I think people just trying to run, a meeting under the rules that you need to have a legal meeting is difficult to do, and yet the chairman actually has to kind of eat their voice sometimes.
Sure.
So.
Dave, were you surprised at his move?
Yeah, Tip O'Neill had a saying, it's like breaking into jail. Going back, he never went back to the State House in Massachusetts, but I think it goes back to what David just said, community service. You have to give back to your community. That's why I got involved in Taylor. I had 3 reasons to get involved in politics back in the 70s, and they were named Don, David, and Douglas. Mm-hmm. And I got involved in for that reason, looking for solutions. David did the same thing in 97, and Doug did the same thing in 2001 for his first term. So, surprised, but not surprised.
David, did his move spark any thought on you're already giving me that look, any thought on your part that, hey, maybe local politics, I should go back?
I don't think this will be a surprise to my brother or my father, but there's absolutely no way I would run for public office again. It's not in my makeup, and so there's been some opportunities. I think I'm in my 30th year of practicing law, but I ran for judge, and I think a better candidate beat me. I think a person who it was a role better suited for him than me. And so I think sometimes the voters make good decisions. Sometimes, and it's not something I regret. If I would have made the best judge I possibly could, but so no, for me, I'm happy to help wherever I can, and throughout the years I've had people come to me and ask me for advice, and I've given it, and I think. Hopefully they followed it. Sometimes I think it turned out later that they hadn't, which would have been, I think, both politically more expedient for them. But it's a great city. We live in a wonderful city. It's complicated. This world's very complicated. And, never say never, but I think if there was an opportunity for me to help, I would, but I don't think in an elected role.
Okay, all righty. Dave, you...
my father may run.
Yeah.
That might be the case.
Happy birthday! You turn 80 today,
yes,
and that's a really nice round number there. That's for sure. Did you expect your sons to follow somewhat in your footsteps here when it came to politics?
Both of my boys had the good fortune of serving as pages in Washington and in the Congress. Yes and no. David, being an attorney, and his first council election, Doug always wanted to be in politics. Doug started managing Bill Ford's computers when he was 13, 14 years old. He put together our database and what we needed to run an election in 1986.
1886.
I've always been proud of the job they've done, and will continue to do. I'm proud of my daughter-in-law. Our family in the last 49, 50 years have served in every part of politics and elective office in this state. Doug in the state legislature, in the House, my daughter-in-law, our daughter-in-law, Erica in the Senate. I served as a Wayne County Charter Commissioner after I served on the City Council. Being the mayor pro tem and the chairman of the City Council was an educational. But I'm never surprised with what any of them do, because that's how they were raised. Go out, do what you want to do. Just do one thing. Don't ever embarrass yourself or me. So.
I hear you. Serving as a chief of staff for somebody like William Ford, what led you down that path? How did that come about?
Friendship.
Friendship. Okay. All right.
Bill Ford and I the year before I ran for city council with the Marshall team, Bill Ford had a very contentious election in 1972. If you remember, it was the busing area. And this family will not be bused, and a lot of the things that go on in the communities now. And people came after Bill Ford because of the busing issue, and it was a federal judge. And he had the most serious primary that he had and the most serious election that he had since his original election in 1964. And I worked with the congressman, and we were members of the Democratic Club of Taylor. And if you ever want to do a story about something, do a story about the Democratic Club of Taylor. When I ever learned politics, learn Taylor politics.
Okay, all right.
It's not for sissies.
I hear you. I hear you. It is not. That's for sure.
It's not.
Bill Ford's father was an auto worker. Okay, and he was killed on the job.
He was a plant guard worker.
Okay,
at the Willow Run plant, and he died because of a fire at the Willow Run plant. And that's really what got Bill involved with the law. He came back after his father died, after he came out of the military, and he went out to the Willow Run plant, and he had people surreptitiously sneak him into the plant. So he found what really happened, and he was able to, his mother was able to sue to get compensation. And it wouldn't have been for the auto workers at the Willow Run plant. He wouldn't have been able to do that. So he never forgot that. He never forgot that we needed good occupational safety and health laws. He never forgot who he was and the community that he came from. He lived across the street, down about between Pardee and Catherine on the north side of Goddard. Didn't have any, they had an outhouse originally.
Really?
And his mother and father were Scottish immigrants. He was first generation American, and grew up in this community. You could take him away from Taylor, but you could never take Taylor out of Bill Ford. Bill Ford just was Taylor.
Dave, let me flip a few things that Bill Ford had a lot to do with when it came to accomplishments. And just give me your impressions of when I throw something like these out, what you think of the Federal Direct Student Loan Program.
Back to his Taylor roots, every child in this country should be able to get an education regardless of their family income. And the Direct Student Loan Program took the banks and the profit margin and the profit motivation out of the lending program and turned it over to the universities and colleges throughout this country. And its main purpose was to reduce the cost, not to the university but to the student and the student's family, so that they would be able to afford an education. He also believed very strongly, until the day he died, of the community college and the junior college concept, that if children had an opportunity to go to a junior or a community college, the cost would be reduced. They would get as good an education as they did if they went away to college, and they'd be prepared for the last 2 years of going away if they needed to a Michigan or a Michigan State or an Albany or wherever it might be.
What about the Workers Adjustment and Retraining Notifications Act?
The Warren
plant closings
Warren
Act.
Act came out of the plant closing legislation of small shops and businesses closing up without any notification. Employees would report to work and be told, we're out of business, your job is gone. What rights do you have? Nothing. So the Warren Act, it didn't, again, with all legislation, there's compromise. It didn't go as far as he wanted. The restriction was on 50 employees and so forth and so on, and if there's economic circumstances. But it came out of a fight of almost 30 years of, and it was part of the ERISA fight, the pension fight, where you protected pension. And ERISA was passed in '74, and he was instrumental in the Employees Retirement Income Security Act. All these acronyms, all tied to names.
Right.
But you know, they're all here. That's what Bill Ford
was about.
Loved. That's
Right,
what he was
right.
about.
Same with the Family and Medical Leave Act?
Family Medical
Okay.
Leave Act went back to 1933, 1934, and went back to John Dingell's father. And it went back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it went back to John Dingell when he took over for his father in 1955, and it went back to Bill Ford and his mother. His mother worked for a little local florist, had 3 children. The youngest was 7, 8 years old when his father died. She never had the protection. The Affordable Care Act would have passed in 1993, 1994, except the Democrats. I won't besmirch her name, but her name is Hillary Clinton. Wanted too big of a package when they should have compromised, like President Obama in 2009 finally did. You have to get laws piecemeal, and they're never perfect.
Right.
And you have to compromise. You have to compromise, and you have to compromise, and you have to never attempt the perfect.
We're going to come back to compromise. You know, boys, we could just dismiss you guys, and I could talk to him all day.
Well, I gotta say,
he's a human history book here.
Yes.
you know, as I'm sitting here, and the reason why I have my brother and my father here, and you start off, it's about me, but there's no story about me that doesn't start with my family. Got to mention my mother, Corky, who worked led the concession stand at Taylor Northwest. You know, when nobody's looking, you know, the things that you do for the community. People to this day, it's like, your mom was, you know, Corky, or they call it Cookie because they couldn't pronounce Corky. And if I don't mention my sister Dawn,
yeah, you guys are going to get. David brought her up to begin with, which was a good move, I thought.
So it just
it's our older sister, by the way, too.
So maybe going a bit off script, you know, to know me is you got to know my family, and you can see I'm learning things as we're talking, and part of that is just shutting up and listening. And you know, even when I got on the council, they wouldn't tell me what to do. They never told me what to do, and we wouldn't consult. People thought that we were consulting on things, and they were, you know, David or whatever. Was telling me what to do. That was never the case. Being able to talk to them afterwards and discuss, and they understood what was going on, and it's kind of a similar role that I now play, you know, with my wife. right? Certainly don't tell her what to do, but I can commiserate.
Right.
So anyway, all right, back to the script.
Well, no, that's fascinating, and that is very, very, very true. You know, your dad just talked about some really important legislation, but you had some at the state level. Okay, while you were in Lansing, you helped expand state incentives for advanced batteries and hybrid vehicles, which is coming into play big time right now. Increased the high school dropout age from 16 to 18, which is really a good move, and created the next Michigan legislation that led to things like the Detroit Regional Aerotropolis Corporation, private-public partnership that drives economic development in our region. You must be proud of those accomplishments.
Probably the most proud is you talked about increasing the dropout age from 16 to 18. And from both sides of the aisle, people were pushing back. You know, why do we need to?
I pushed back.
Yeah. Well, why do you? Well, again, from all different sides, right? it goes back to the 1800s, and back then you could drop out of school,
Right.
and go to work in a farm. Later on, it was you could go and work in an auto plant, and the effective age was somewhere around 14 and a half, 15 years old, right? Because once you got to a certain age, they stopped chasing after you. So, you know, you mentioned I'm an engineer. I've watched the data since that went into effect. The graduation rate has gone up. The dropout age has gone down.
So I was wrong.
I was going to say, so yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth.
That's
David.
how it works.
Well, again, the majority of people that are in prison are high school dropouts. So it costs us all $35,000, probably $50,000 a year if they didn't stay in school. And we made it not just about the child, but about the parent. That it really became the parent's choice if a child could drop out, and that's working with the Republicans. You know, I told them that imagine your child coming home and saying, "Hey, Mom, Dad, I'm not going to school anymore, but you still have to put a roof over my head. You have to pay for my meals." And they said, "Let's make it really. If the parents and the educators aren't pulling in the same direction, then the child has no, or the teacher has no." Ability to really get at them. So anyway, long story short, you go into all those economic type of things, but keeping kids in school, it had not been done for 110, 120 years, and we got it done, and the data shows that it was a good thing.
Let's switch gears a little, because you guys have all jumped into this a little bit. You've all been in politics over a long period of time here. Okay, we've got a long stretch of time. What are your impressions of today's highly polarized, for lack of a better term, political atmosphere? Because this situation doesn't seem sustainable from what I'm watching.
Well, it's the polarization that's really the biggest threat. You've always had the parties at each other, but into the early 90s or the mid-90s, you never had a solid opposition, whether it's in Lansing or it's in Washington or to a lesser degree in Wayne County. At one point in time, you only had 2 or 3 Republicans on the county commission, but their voice was still heard, their districts were still heard. In Washington, it started about the time in 1992, 1993, when a guy by the name of Newt Gingrich decided we got to tear the house down and rebuild it, and the only way you do that is you destroy the other. And you never go along with them. And unfortunately, we always got along. Bill Ford and I, they're Republicans on the city council when I was. It's a nonpartisan election. I never asked anybody who'd you vote for president, or you want to take care of the community. Now, when you have 177-0 vote of the Republicans in 2009 on the Affordable Care Act, I knew this country was in trouble. And then what happened the following year, and
or vice versa. Democrats have done the same thing.
and Democrats and vice versa. That's wrong. That's wrong in politics, where you can get at least one or two Democrats or one or two Republicans to break party and go on an issue because they believe in the issue. And what Doug just was talking about, education. If you can't get someone to agree with you that we have to have and continue to have the best educational system in this country, then we're doomed. You have to educate your children. That's what got my wife and I involved in politics in 1960s and early 70s was Holland PTA, Parent Teachers Association. When I was the president, she succeeded me as president, we got involved. We can tell you the names of the teachers that these guys had. The principal of the school was somebody that I went to elementary school with, parochial school in Dearborn.
John Daniels.
John Daniels. He still is in contact with his kindergarten, Rachel Ryan. Eileen Bihar.
Well, I'd say this. I mean, to your question, I think Doug raised the point of data. In my view is we have gerrymandered our system. The local government is different, right? I mean, you have, we, at least in our city, you're elected citywide. But we isolate people and we segment them now, and the data can almost drive down to almost, you know, what type of chips, what type of pop you drink, you know, whatever. And if you look at the states throughout the country, I think the Congress is now, I think they're in the 40s, where they really believe that you have seats in play. And so if you're, regardless of the party and the people that are listening on this, whether you identify as a Republican or Democrat or independent, a lot of times I think it's really become the opposite. You no longer really choosing your representative, they're choosing ours. And as a lawyer, I have a lot of problems with a number of Supreme Court decisions, but I think in particular, the abdication that they've done in this, you just can't have, Wisconsin's an example, but you can, that's a Republican side, you could probably pick a Democratic state, and they're not going to unilaterally disarm, the parties aren't. And so you have Wisconsin, where the state legislature, where it's a base, we all know they're 50-50 states, like Michigan's basically a 50-50 state. It's purple, it flips back and forth, but they have 70+ % of the seats, and in one election they get less votes than the Democrats did, but they have 70-some % of the seats.
Makes no sense.
At some point, what happens is legislation's now being driven that is so one-sided. They don't have to compromise, and actually it polarizes even within that party. I think there are a lot of people, regardless of party, we all have different views. I mean, sometimes the biggest infighting happens in your own party, right? I mean, Democrats are famous for it, but on the Republican side, we have become so polarized, and that we can't get anything done. Or what we do get done just kind of whipsaws our government back and forth. There's no continuity, and unfortunately, we all know that, you know, people have to live their daily lives. There's a lot of tough things that you have to face, and they're not into the minutia, right? I could pull out something from 1999 that my dad has from 1975 from the council, and Doug could pull out ones. They're indelible. They hit in your mind, and yet you solve it, right? And you come to a conclusion, and there's no discussion. It's just talk, and certainly social media. You can jump into the media, but we've just driven our country so far apart, and it's difficult. I think everybody is facing. I think your premise to your question is, where do we go from here? Because how do we get this better? And I think it's scary right now.
But we have to find a way.
We have to.
Well, under the surface, right? What you see in the media and pitting one party against each other, neighbors against each other. The reality is, my time in the Michigan House of Representatives, some of my best friends were from the other side. And I'll mention Wayne Schmidt from Traverse City, a Republican, now a Republican senator. When he heard I was running for city council, not out of his PAC, not out of his campaign fund, he wrote me a personal check. And Wayne will always be one of my best friends that came out. Same with Joe Hoffman. And that's one thing that people don't understand. When you're elected from across the state, I now have a connection to every area within the state of Michigan. And we may quarrel on the individual merits, but we all agree, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, we all fought for the state of Michigan. And we talked about what was important to Traverse City, what was important to Holland, what was important to Taylor. And those, when you agree, right, when they dissolved the Inkster School District, and part of it went to Taylor, part of it went to Romulus, part of it went to Wayne Westland. When I told them, hey, we need some money because we inherited like buildings with trees growing out of them.
That was an interesting issue.
And yeah, and they had actually a Republic. Of course, they were in the majority, but we needed to have appropriations. And so they came down, and they were like, how'd they let this happen? How'd they let an elementary with a tree growing out of it occur? It's like, I don't know. It wasn't my district, but now it's my problem. And we got $5 million allocated, and the whole idea was, don't take it out on the kids, right? Because the burden that was put on the Taylor School District, number one, they took care of the kids that they had to educate, but from a financial standpoint. So anyway, everything is doom or gloom, as you currently said. If you sit down and you say, things are always better 20, 30, 40 years ago. There were always issues. There was always bones of contention, and quite frankly, that's why you have government, and to discuss the issues of the day. And when things are finally resolved, you're like, well, why wasn't that done sooner? Right. Sometimes it takes society to catch up with what you're trying to do. So I just want to caution that everything is not doom or gloom.
Well, when you get into, I think at the end of the day, you certainly, in that realm, you have to get back to the art of compromise here, somehow or the other. You have to get back to the conversation that you were having across the aisle, or that you had across the aisle, or certainly that Bill Ford had across the aisle.
Local politics is the most beautiful thing in the world. What's wrong with politics now is they've made a sporting event out of it.
Right.
And politics is not a sporting event. I'd like to throw to the boys that on the city council, I had two people come in on an issue on a fence. And you vote on for this person here, and they're happy with you. I vote against this person over here, they're unhappy with you. They come back in 6 months on a totally different issue.
Right.
And now you vote for this person over here and against this. Now you don't have either one of them happy with you because neither one forgot your no vote.
Right. Right.
So,
exactly.
But that's what you were elected to do, is you do, and there are never any, and I've always had to watch in saying this, there are never any final solutions. There are only things that the problems that he's facing in 2022, we faced in 1973. It's zoning problems, cemetery problems, paving roads, maintaining my roads that are not dedicated to the city.
Flooding, right? Flooding.
Yeah, flooding.
Doesn't ever go away. Yeah.
I laugh. I grew up in Dearborn over on Appleheim. And in 1950, we had some of the most horrendous floods in our basement on Appeline flooded. But there were viaducts that go under Oakland Boulevard and Ford Road, and we made a game out of it. We used to go down there and go swimming in the flood.
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea now.
I did that on Beach Daily in Goddard.
Doug, let's switch gears here for a second. When it comes to the technicalities of the job, and you brought this up earlier, the role of the chair can be a very misunderstood issue. Can you explain, because it's really the role of the chair is a lot more complex than maybe somebody out in the audience thinks it is.
The easiest way to shut me up was to give me the gavel. When I was a chairman pro tem, right, I could speak and say what was on my mind. Once you have that gavel, you are speaking for the entire city of Taylor. You are, at that point, the representative for the entire city, as well as the entire council. So it's not about me, it's about we. And I have to remind myself that I never say I. If I'm going to say the word I believe, no, that's not my role. And it's not to get my will. It's to facilitate the discussion, make certain that all the council members, which are my co-equals, I've got one vote. Being the chairman doesn't, give me any more weight in a vote than anybody else. And to facilitate that discussion amongst my colleagues, my peers, as well as the citizenship. And sometimes it's hard. When somebody says something that I don't personally like, I've got to say, well, thank you. Do you have any further comment? And if you're watching, sometimes that may seem that, to some, that you agree with what the person just said, or, but it is not my, I need to remain as neutral as possible and facilitate the discussion, debate, and the business of the legislative branch. And we are a co-equal branch with the executive branch, with the mayor. So that's my role. And I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But I try to do my best to ensure that the people's business is being conducted in a lawful and orderly fashion.
So that pretty much sums it up. When you look at your accomplishments so far, what are you most proud of professionally and personally?
I'll start off personally. Of course, my family. Why do we do anything that we do? You start off as as a child, and you want to make your parents proud. You want to make your family proud. Ultimately, you want to leave the world better than you found it. So from a personal standpoint, really professional, pairs, I'm not going to pick out any one thing or another, other than say I'm glad that I was able to be involved in my in work, as well as in the city. And it was mentioned earlier, I don't shut up on Zoom calls or WebEx. And there's a lot of people that, right or wrong, they may hear something. They know if they say something, then you get a task, right? And so, I can be on work calls and there's 20 different people, and gosh, I'm sucking the air out of the room. But if something's not right, I speak up. But I think if you're going to speak up, then you got to be ready. Okay, what's the next thing is what's what do you think is the solution? It may not be the perfect solution, but at least you're being engaged. And so from a professional standpoint, I'm proud that I've been engaged, and no matter what you do, my father alluded to it, and I love that example. I got to use that one about the fence, and you're opening yourself to criticism. We could all just stay at home, stay in our basements, not talk to our neighbors, but what kind of life is that?
I hear you. Dave, what do you remember about these guys from their formative years? What, you got any special stories that you want to embarrass them with?
Tell them about the time where I went to the city auction and bought a mini bike.
Oh,
and he's like, "You can't drive that in the city of Taylor." I was like, "I bought it at the police station."
well, the other thing, Doug is probably more of the independent action type. David is the more loyally methodical. Doug was the type who would take a bus from Beach Daily and Goddard Road downtown Detroit when he was 9, 10 years old without anybody knowing about it.
Yes.
I
wouldn't do that at 55.
He would. They were always good students. Doug was valedictorian at Truman. David graduated 4th or 5th in his class.
What the heck happened to you?
Yeah.
He let him down.
We'll leave it off.
You'll leave that one out? Okay.
But he helped me write my speech.
Oh, there you go. Okay. All right.
There are some family confidences.
The one thing that the boys had that most families don't have, their sister led the way, and she was the one who was the first one to go to college, to get her settled at Eastern Michigan University in 1983. Doug says, "You never did all those things with me that you did for Dawn and you did for David." I said, "Well, you already knew how to do it."
Right.
And so they had each other. That's the other plus thing about family.
The heir and the spare. Also, it's like I could go do whatever the heck I wanted to.
He always could. He started doing things when he was young. He started working on computers when he was 9 and 10. He had Ataris and everything else. That's his inquisitive mind. This guy here started reading the sports page when he was 3 years old. He loved the sports page. He loved baseball. And he read about it all constantly.
I think the thing what our parents did for us is, you give that support, right? And that's always important. And it's not just your parents, but it's your friends, your family. And I mean, we live in a wonderful community. There are challenges. There were challenges back then. But I think the key is we got to find our interests, and you go out and you develop them, right? And sometimes you change your mind as a kid. But I always felt supported, and I knew they had my back. And I mean, my mother has my mother's probably the best politician in the family.
Better.
To be better and just really, just truly. But she had a lot of great sayings, and she just, it comes for myself. I'm very competitive, extremely competitive, and so that's something that you have to learn to develop. And right as you grow as a person, today I negotiate. I'm a business attorney, a corporate attorney, and that those life lessons you get from your teachers, from your parents, go through with your whole life, right? And you learn from it. You say, hey, I could have done something better, but you know what? You keep pushing. And I think engagement is probably the key thing. I think that's what I would say to everyone. I say it's easy. People need to get engaged, and it's hard because we all fear that when you volunteer to do something, you get sucked in, right? And then you're doing a lot of things. But that's the critical to make this world a better place is to volunteer, right? We can't always think about what we're going to get out of it. I mean, the most thing you get out of no matter when you do Little League Baseball, and you could probably, if you had somebody in just on Little League Baseball, the amount of people that volunteer after their son or daughter's involved in whatever sport is just truly tremendous, right? And you learn good things and bad things from that too. We have good coaches, good days, bad days. But I tell you,
Good parents, bad parents.
Good parents, bad parents. I mean, some of my best experience with baseball, Little League Baseball, from baseball. Some of my worst things in my life that I would not want to explain to someone else are from baseball, right? But you know what? They're all in here. They're in my heart, and you have to want to make it better. Because if you do it and you reinforce those bad habits, then that's not what I would want for my children. I certainly wouldn't want it for my grandchildren in the future.
Sure,
So,
exactly.
Right.
Dave, who was the if you had to pinpoint it down to one person, who was the biggest influence in your life?
Oh, it's easy. Bill Ford and the UAW.
Okay.
There's two entities.
Okay.
Bill Ford saw something in me that I have a PhD. I have a public high school diploma, and I'm a union man. And I started in the newspaper business as you did. When I was 8 years old, delivering papers. And I delivered the Detroit Times for 11 years until I graduated from high school. I had a paper route of 450 customers. That's the best education I ever had. The people I met on my route and so forth. So the most influence in my life, hands down, is Bill Ford.
Now, other than, because I know you're going to default to your parents right away, other than your parents, who was your greatest influence, Doug?
Go to David. Let me think about that.
Okay, Dave. Oh, now you got
yeah, it's tough because I think your parents are, in my greater family. I think you get it from, for me, I think my father did have the mentor. I didn't get that mentor on the professional side.
Okay.
I think it's just the nature, and so that's a tough one for me. In some regards, I think my family just was the most important, and I knew I had a sounding board. And one thing about my dad saying about public education, and my parents really it said that our education was important. I think my father would have loved to have been a lawyer. I think he is a pseudo lawyer, and I particularly love negotiating with pseudo lawyers all the time. But every day, and in truth, we all are nowadays. I think that's
we're negotiators.
We're all negotiators. I mean, human beings are negotiators, right? So I don't really have I can point out one other than both of my parents.
Okay, Doug, you got a little
well,
pause
and David worked with this gentleman as well, Donald K. Anderson, who became the clerk of the U.S. House of Representatives. So imagine 16 years old and going off to Washington, D.C. I, at that point in time, had no inclination for politics. Some of the people that also went off to Washington, D.C. My friend Ann Milgram is now the head of the DEA. Just like mind-blowing things. But from a professional standpoint, Don Anderson ran the floor of the House of Representatives. And I worked in his office. And he was very exacting in his requirements, standards, professional conduct. And I did, so well that I stayed in that position the entire time I was in D.C. for a year. But those lessons that I was taught by him, and he started off as a page himself. Right. And when he retired and he was getting the standing ovation from the House of Representatives, he said, "This is the only country that allows a lowly citizen to reach extraordinary responsibility." So I would say from a professional standpoint, former clerk of the House of Representatives, Donald K. Anderson, would be the top of the list.
Now, if you guys aren't, now you're not on the job anymore because you're retired.
13 years.
Okay. You got to count it down.
Oh, yeah. October the 30th.
Doug, what do you enjoy most when you're not on the job? When you're not doing Ford stuff, you're not doing city stuff, what do you enjoy most?
Well, it's kind of strange, but but most recently, before I was even on council, the homeowners association.
Oh, okay.
Where I live.
You got into that.
I did, and everybody can make the jokes
Tell her
about
another
that.
thing I told him not to do.
Yeah, but I've got to know my neighbors. And working on trying to solve issues closer to home, and thinking about this past week, for my neighbors' lawnmower service didn't show up early this year, and mowing their lawn. But also when I needed help, I don't know that the simply you could go into, you say the normal answer, play golf. I don't get the chance maybe a few times a year.
And you live on a golf course.
And I live on a golf course. But in that most...
In a gated community. In Taylor.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing that worked on. The gate didn't work for the last 4 years. So as a mechanical engineer, I'm like, okay, how do we fix the gate? Which, by the way, when I'm done with this weekend, the bolts came off. So, hey, Gary, you need to get some better bolts. But,
oh, my.
Again, I'm the most... working with people. It's like that. You can say that you can get within your own household and everything else, but what I like doing, I still like to do stuff with other people.
Gotcha. David, how about you?
For me, I was doing a work. They said what's about breeding an artifact is one of the things they do nowadays. But I love baseball cards.
Oh, really?
Huge. I love them, and I collect them just because to open them.
Okay.
It's like being a little kid. And so, I have a huge collection. You can collect cards in a lot of different ways. You can collect them for value. I've never sold a card, so Doug and my dad know I've got boxes and boxes and boxes.
Including some of mine.
And still, I probably have some of his too. So, when I that's something that relaxes me, and it makes you a kid again. And there's that kind of tactile, you feel something real. And I think that's the key nowadays, is that for me, it slows me down, right? It allows me, you can have a very intense job, but not everything has to be intense, right? Not everything has to be serious. And it brings you back in time, and it connects me. So when I brought the artifact in, I brought of Steve Avery because I could tell him where I'm from. I could say I could be proud of Taylor North winning the Little League, and I think everyone from Taylor, whether you're from Taylor now, you see it on, that's the social media where it's completely positive, right? You're very proud of being from Taylor. They live in Australia now, and we have friends, and I was hoping that their Australian team qualified last year to come for the Junior League World Series, and we all know we had none. And so I'm proud of my city. I like to show it off. I mean, Heritage Park is, I think it's one of the best parks in the state. And so to me, that's my connection to my baseball, which I love, something I love as a kid, and I love it today. So.
Well, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. Doug, looking forward, aspirations?
You know what? I've got, next year I would have had 30 years at Ford Motor Company.
Okay.
By taking a leave of absence, that 6-year leave of absence that I was a state rep, I took 50% pay cut, to be called a crook. Financially, probably the worst decision I've ever made.
I told him not to run for that too.
So honestly, I've got another at least 6 years to go at Ford
Do
Motor.
you ever listen to him? Every key decision that we've gone over so far, he said no, you said yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's his sounding board. Yeah.
That's true.
That's true.
That really is.
Well, it's you know, the scales. You know, you wanna go and be involved, and you gotta have somebody say,
Have you thought about it?
you know,
Right?
have you thought about the ramifications? So the ramifications for me, right, is you know, this past Monday, 2,000 of my colleagues were walked out the door at Ford Motor Company. I am in my 50s. Who knows, you know, when I might get, you know, the tap on the shoulder. So for the next 6 years, I've got to worry about, you know, putting in my time at Ford Motor Company.
Getting 6 years.
And being retired. And one thing I want to point out, not one of us, nobody in my family gets a pension from the city of Taylor.
Nothing.
Nothing. You know, and we don't get health care from the city of Taylor. That has never been what we've been about. And I don't begrudge, you know, to anybody else, you know, over the years. But on the flip side, I do have to make certain that I put in my time at Ford Motor Company. And so in terms of aspirations, my aspiration is to grow old in the city that I've always called home.
Okay. You're going to want to serve in the future?
Yeah, I'm fine to step back and let others serve.
He's already serving.
And
Well, that is true.
you know,
I mean, he is where he wants to be
Right.
at this point in time. And that's what you do.
Exactly.
But I do think, to your point on serving, and I served for one term, and it was the right term for me.
Okay.
And I knew that, and Doug decided, and there was another one where we had a long, hard discussion because I think you know it, when you kind of know what I would describe as how the sausage is made. I think I think I got the saying from you is, I don't really need for you to vote with me in the parking lot. So it was always a struggle for me, is you think you're making an intelligent, rational argument and you're going in the right direction, you lose the vote, right? And you have somebody in the parking lot says, well, I agree with you, who voted against you? I don't need that, right? I mean, so there was a certain part where I served and I thought, hey, someone else can serve. Doug, in this case, Doug basically took over from my seat, and I think somebody will take over from Doug. Somebody took over from Doug's seat before.
Sure.
Hey, this is the way the world works. We need to have people involved. The more people that get involved, the better we're all off, right? I mean, that's the nature of how we're going to make progress. I don't know. None of us have all the answers. So why somebody that comes in, and you should be able to be persuaded nowadays. I mean, you can't just say, hey, this is my way. And we label people. That's what drives me crazy. I mean, talk about whether on a city council, it's nonpartisan. When someone goes in, maybe that's tough for people on the voting because you're not voting for it. You don't get to pull a straight party lever or something. You don't know. And that's probably a good idea. We come from different walks of life. And Taylor, despite what people try to say, is very diverse. And it's become much more diverse. You know, and that's, in my opinion, this is my opinion, that makes us that's been our country forever. That's what makes us better. So there will be more people to come, and whether Doug does something different, I think that the decision he has to make with his family and what's the best for, and does he have a positive influence, right? Do you have something to offer? What's your plan? What's your policies? I mean, that's what we should be voting on. Where, not just labeling people, and then people are loved like they're liberal or conservative or progressive or Democrat or Republican. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, what are you about? What's your nature? And so I think what it demonstrates, in my opinion, and Doug, I think he was surprised at being chair. I think in some regards he was like, hey, this would have been a lot easier if I'm not, right? But you know what? He runs a very professional meeting. That's critical. I mean,
In
especially as a lawyer.
1973, and Doug shared this from the Taylor Historical Society, 54 plus people ran for city council in a primary.
54.
In 2021, 17 people ran in a primary and 3 got eliminated. Citizen participation is critical for a democracy to function, and no person owns any office and you don't inherit it, you don't pass it on. Doug and I joke, we went to inauguration in 2009, and we ran into the former state senator from Ann Arbor, Liz who? And that's how, her name is Liz Breather, but it was Liz who, and she was also the former mayor of Ann Arbor. So once you're out of office, you're Doug who?
Erica's husband. I was a plus one.
I was Corky's husband.
Okay.
Okay, when I was running in 1973, I was Corky's husband.
Based on what you guys have said, that's not necessarily a bad moniker to have.
No.
No, not at all.
Well, one thing I wanted to point out, right? We're on cable. One of the things that David, again, we're going off. David fought to televise city council meetings, right? This is the people's money that is paying for it, right? For since the Wayne Cablevision first began, over 40 years ago, there's a portion of money that has been set aside for public education, public access,
Right.
and from the late 70s, early 80s up until the early 2000s, there was never the council meetings weren't broadcast. We did not have a forum such as you're providing here today, and that's something that David pushed for. And at the time, he had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and he said, "I've got to go take care of my family." And there were some folks that were whatever the city council at that point in time
Wasn't comfortable yet.
weren't comfortable with broadcasting, and so that was one of the main things I ran for. That an ethics ordinance in the city of Taylor. David started the discussion, but I wanted. I was like,
Well, I think that's. I mean, partially, and that's you work on something, right? And you don't get it to the finish line. I think it's part to the compromise. Eventually, Doug was able to persuade people that this made sense. I have my own view. I mean, I think the state government. We're the second worst in the country for basically ethics in our and the way we have information. To me, no one should be afraid. If you're going to be in an elected position, that's one of the things you give up is that kind of privacy of potential conflicts of interest. I do it every day, and anybody who works in any company fills one out every time, right? And I think it's important to the people. It builds confidence. I mean, I think what people, the voters and just the citizenry right now, and this is not just politics. I mean, I think people like to put down politicians. And I'm proud to say I served and that I was a politician, because really I'm just a representative of them. But the most important thing that they have to do is to get the information they need. And I think we were talking earlier, the information we take in now is so isolating. I mean, we can almost identify back to, what do you listen to? Do you listen to Fox News? Do you listen to CNN?
Sure.
And I just think that people just they're not open-minded enough, and I think hopefully they can, and they have to trust the information they're given. But if we can give them better confidence in government that we are looking out for them, and maybe there's some improvements this year. I think there's some constitutional amendments that people are going to have a chance to vote on, and if people are listening, when they're listening to this, go out there, find out what the ballot amendments are, read up on them, and get informed, and seek out information that may not be from always the source you get it from. That's what I would say.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I know with, especially this series of shows that we're doing right now, this Up Close and Personal, we're trying to get away from, this series is based on telling the person's story, okay? When we first started Tim Woolley's first show, when he was mayor, he spent the first 45 minutes of the show talking about not mayor stuff, talking about not politics, talking about who he was.
Right.
Okay, hey, I served, you know, this is how I served in the military. My brother was killed in a Taylor house fire. You know, my dad worked at this store for this man. You know, and a lot of people, that resonated with a lot of people.
Well,
and I think this conversation is going to resonate.
It's the Bill Ford story. I mean,
Right.
and if we personalize and really look at the person instead of just demonize, I think your comment earlier, that and Newt Gingrich was one, because I was a page in the 80s, and I could tell lots of stories, some of the most famous that happened on the floor. I took a call, and there's what they call special orders, and they basically talked to no one on the floor, and they're acting as if the person's in, and why aren't you responding to me? And Tip O'Neill got involved, and it became a brouhaha, and Tip O'Neill was the one that was sanctioned because of it. But the point was, we demonize people, and whether it's Tim, and getting to know the mayor in its own ways, gives you a better, it doesn't mean that you're going to agree with them, right? You don't have to agree with them, but at least you know where they're coming from.
Beings.
Right, and if we actually treat it, it's not just Tim, but it's the 60,000 people that live in our city.
Absolutely.
And getting to Doug's point earlier about getting to know your neighbor.
Right.
I tell you all the time, it's amazing if you just walk out. You know, there's 17 or 18-year-old kids that are playing on your street playing basketball, and your kids can't go to sleep. Do you call the police? Maybe sometimes you do, or do you walk out there and you have a rational discussion with them and say, hey, I'm not telling you to go up to the community center, because it is closed at 10 or 11 at night too, and you're trying to play at 1 o'clock in the morning. But you know what? You can't do this. And people, you know, if you have it's all about communication. If you talk to people and you take them on their level, and you're not you know who I am. I mean, that's one of the best lines I love from anybody. Do you know who I am? Well, first of all, who cares?
Did you lose your mind? You don't know who you are?
Yeah, I mean, you know who I am? And I think it doesn't matter to bring that out no matter where you are. It's like we all want to play a power trip.
See, these two are politicians. I'm a statesman.
Yeah.
Okay, you got to understand that.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Well, you brought up the mayor. One thing that people may not know is that we all started in, there a lot of people in the community went to Taylor Preschool. In the northwest portion of the city. That's where it started, old church. Mrs. Nixon was my teacher, and you know, back in '73, '74, I was wondering why they were so mean to Mrs. Nixon's son, because I heard the name. Anyway, bring it back to Tim. We went to the same preschool. Michelle Toko, Michelle Masters, my friend Nick DiMeccina. We all went to that same preschool.
And the mayor's daughter.
What's that?
Marshall.
Oh,
And Mayor Marshall's daughter?
Kelly Marshall.
Kelly Marshall.
And a lot of different folks. But what people may not realize is Gen X is in control. You look around the city of Taylor, it's like, yeah, what's your aspirations? Like, I don't know.
Maybe Carl can explain it to me. I don't know which one. I guess we're up to Z now. And I guess I was declared, I wasn't a baby boomer. I was a war baby, so I don't know.
Okay.
See, I'm a 42.
Okay, all right.
Okay, boomer.
Size 42 coat and born in 42. But I think there's a disservice in breaking it down that Gen Z and Gen X and baby boomers and whatever have it. I have no fear for this country. This country is no worse off than it was in the 60s. And it's no better off than it was in the 60s. Technology, I love saying, Alexa, play this song for me.
You just blew up everybody's Alexa.
I love technology. I love where it's taken us, but this country will always work towards its better end in the end.
Especially if we talk.
That's right.
You know, it's just that simple. Whether you're going out talking to a neighbor, whether you're talking across the aisle, whether you're talking to somebody you're negotiating with,
Communication.
or whether we're here
Yeah.
celebrating Doug.
Well, and Carl, I gotta say thank you to you for for facilitating these, and the studio. By the way, folks, this isn't real. It's a green screen behind us. So if you think we paid a bunch of money to buy this different glass, then this is all fake. Here, can you see? Yeah. But honestly, the service that you and your team behind the scenes do, we're trying different avenues of getting information out to people and showing the human aspect, right? Because having the conversation, like I said, I asked for I think we're the only family that has had 3 people be on the city council, and my wife, mentioned, hey, I'd like to have her here, and she's like, well, I didn't serve in city government. And I was like, okay, but anyway, that's
it was already a 3-week survey.
To kind of tell my story is to understand my family, and people say, oh, you're running on your name. Well, guess what? If my brother was a schmuck, or my sister was a schmuck, or my dad or my sister. Or mother.
Your sister's a Scheniger now.
Yeah. But honestly, I mean, all that, people know my family through many different avenues.
Sure.
And anyway, what I want to say to you is thank you for this forum. It shows the human aspect. It allows people to, get to know their elected officials, and for that I'm very thankful.
Well, believe me, guys, this has been a lot of fun. Okay,
we appreciate it.
And I don't know about these 2 guys. Okay, but you're going to be invited back at some point. We're going to get you back.
We got to get him and Tony Nacita.
Yeah, that would be. We get some fascinating discussions.
The one beautiful thing about age, but I have been blessed with a memory. I can tell you customers that I had in 1950, and I am the most fortunate person in the world.
Well, that is truly a gift. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Tremendous. This has been a tremendous discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's been very, very enjoyable. That's about it for today's show. Thanks for coming in. Continue success to all of you. And you two have to make sure that this guy's birthday is special today.
Tomorrow.
Because again,
or tomorrow.
Big party.
Okay,
Big party.
It's going to be special because we're going to have Pia's Catering.
80 years old.
Gotta give a shout out.
You can't go wrong.
And
you can't go wrong.
Josephine Pecci, who owns Pia's, she's doing the cooking.
Oh my goodness.
I won't tell you Josephine's age, but she's a few years
younger than me.
Okay, I hear you.
Younger
I hear you. Well, okay, for Joe Camilleri and Samantha Rickert behind the scenes, I'm Carl Zymak. Thanks for joining us on this Up Close and Personal, and we'll see you next time when we feature another one of Taylor's Community Leaders.